Okay, good morning students, welcome back. Today let us look at the essay written by Eisenstein, Word and Image, in order to understand his theory of montage better. We have already watched his classic movie Battleship Potemkin and seen the ways in which he has perfected the art and the technique of montage by placing scenes or shots together in order to create, to tell the story, to take the movie forward, to create the idea of action and to evoke the desired emotion in the audience. So that is the purpose of montage. It is not merely a technical activity. It should not be left at the level of mere technique. It involves technique, but the effect that it achieves is much greater. It can convey much emotional appeal and carry the theme or the story and the plot forward. So it is by introducing montage in such a large scale manner that Eisenstein influenced the language of filmmaking. Even today, people swear by his observations and his craft of montage when they study filmmaking and when they make films on their own. Okay, so allow me to get the presentation ready. Yes, so to begin with, let me invite your attention to this slide, the image there and the words written alongside. Okay, let's read the lines. Scent of plum blossoms on the misty mountain path, a big rising sun. Any responses? Do you know what this is? The name of the author is indicated there, Basho, Matsuo Basho, the Japanese writer. I hope it is clear to you that this is a haiku. A haiku is a kind of poem, mainly popular in Japan. It is of Japanese origin, consisting of 17 syllables, and where you have these lines which speak through images. The images in each line are normally of a heterogeneous nature, as you have in this haiku. Scent of plum blossoms. That is the image that you have in the first line. In the second line, on the misty mountain path. And in the third line, you have a whole new image which conveys the impression of what is conveyed by the earlier two lines. The scent of plum blossoms on a misty mountain path evokes in you the feeling of a big rising sun, a sun which is rising, therefore the brightness grows, the intensity grows, the image of the sun. It is something that engulfs you, and that is the kind of pervasive, all-pervasive beauty that the plum blossoms, with their intoxicating smell, the scent of plum blossoms. You have a mingling of all the senses there, the smell, the sight, the feel, probably the taste, not in this one, but normally in haikus we have those evoked, and altogether it creates an impression of something that surges up, something that has this overwhelming feeling of fullness, ripeness, maturity, life, dynamism, and so on. So, these can't be explained in words, but that is precisely what a haiku is all about. And if you are familiar with haikus and the ways in which haiku evokes these emotions in you, then you should have no difficulty in relating to what Eisenstein says about montage. One of the important practitioners of the montage, Eisenstein is often considered as the father of montage. And we just need to look at some of the shots in the movie that we just watched, Battleship Potemkin, to see how he created these artificially produced images of motion. Both the first two sets that you find there are from the movie Battleship Potemkin. On the Odessa steps, you have this image of, the spectator, the one who watches it, and later you have the shot of the broken glasses. Together, when these are placed together, they convey a sense of motion. It is not really, he did not shoot that action like that, but these two shots separately create that impression of motion. A more famous example is that of the stone lions. You have the statue of lions. At the time that the revolution, reaches its peak, you have all the ships surrounding the battleship Potemkin, and then the feeling of revolution surging up in everyone to the extent that they allow the battleship to pass without even shooting once at it, because the feeling of revolution, the feeling that the battleship stands there for, Potemkin stands for the idea of revolution, is something that is highlighted, and it is conveyed in a very visual, beautifully visual manner by Eisenstein, using the images of these stone lions. It's they have no place there. Out of the blue, he uses these images as they would be found in buildings, at a gate post and so on. In the first scene, you happen to see a lion which appears to be sleeping. In the second one, it is awoken, and in the third one, it is a risen lion. So that idea of the feeling of revolution, awakening the people, that is what is conveyed by Eisenstein using that montage of the sleeping lions. The third set is from another movie, we will not go to that. But now we need to discuss the essay, Word and Image, in the book, The Film Sense. He, in another book, The Film Form, it is an earlier, in the other book, he talks in detail about montage and invites our attention to 5 different types of montage. He uses the terms metric, rhythmic, tonal, overtonal, and intellectual to talk about these kinds of montage. We do not need to study that essay, so we need not go into the details of it, but the terms are used in the sense in which metric and rhythmic are both, using the image of music in metric montage and in rhythmic montage. He uses the shots in exactly the same way that notes would be used in a musical composition. Tonal and intellectual. The overtonal one, what you have in the Odessa step sequence in Battleship Potemkin is the overtonal montage. It is supposed to be a combination of all other kinds of montage: metric, rhythmic, tonal, and intellectual. Intellectual is one where you do not have the images, speaking. It is the idea, the concept that is conveyed. And the overtonal is one which combines all these 4 different techniques and gives you a composite and a wholesome feel, that is the overtonal montage, which you have in the Odessa step sequence in Battleship Potemkin. What you have, through the adoption of montage as a technique, is Eisenstein conveying through film his understanding of the dialectical philosophy that Marxists uphold. The Marxist theory of dialecticism or dialectical materialism is exactly what? It's that approach that Eisenstein has towards filmmaking. Dialectical thinking is one which believes that for any, history moves forward with the coming together of conflicts conflicting ideas, conflicting forces, conflicting ideologies, and so on. That is what takes time or history forward. And he quotes the words of a few other writers in order to convey the very important fact that it is not just in films that we can talk about montage. In fact, montage, which is nothing but the juxtaposition of images, impressions, etc., of a heterogeneous nature, can be found everywhere in literature, in music, in art, in sculpture, in acting, in the art of acting, and in life in general. And to prove that point, he quotes from the German writer Goethe, who said, "In nature, we never see anything isolated, but everything in connection with something else which is before it, beside it, under it, and over it." Or it's almost like saying that we relate to anything in relation to something else. Rain. We love the rain. We hate it when it does not rain. We hate the summer, but we love the rains. That kind of everything is understood in relation to something else. Red is my favorite color. I like red because it is different from blue, or it is different from, let us say, black. And red is something that you understand in relation to something else. So this placing together of ideas and concepts, it is part and parcel of life. In Marxist thinking, Marx and Engels, they believe that the dialectical system is only the conscious reproduction of the dialectic course of the external events of the world. Everything in the world has dialectics in it. A dynamic comprehension of things is also basic to the same degree for a correct understanding of art and of all art forms. Every work of art, has this as one of its guiding principles. It is very close to what the new critics would have said. We have heard about the language of paradox, Glenn Brooks's famous essay. He considers paradox as that which brings beauty to poetry. Alan Tate, another new critic, says the same thing using a different term, tension. Alan Tate's concept of tension in poetry, it is nothing but paradox, irony, conflict, and so on. The new critics, each one of them use different forms to talk about the way in which the beauty or the strength of lines of poetry can be found in the way that opposites or conflicting ideas and impressions are brought together. And the new critical way of thinking, or new criticism, we know is a very formalist way of criticism, formalist way of reading literary works. And that is exactly what you have in Eisenstein's approach to filmmaking. It is one that is very much concerned about the form or the manner, much more than the matter. The matter is, of course, important, the theme is important, the story is important, but more important is the way in which you tell the story, the manner. Just as Russian formalists and new critics and the practical critics like I. Richards, T.S. Eliot, and so on, focused on the language, the images, the style, the metaphors, and the tone, and such formal elements of poetry. You can think of Eisenstein as somebody who set, who was very much of a pioneer in that kind of thinking, because his films were made much before new criticism came into existence. It was around the same time that the Russian formalists were making waves with their new kind of literary criticism, drawing attention to the text, the language of the text, and not to anything else, not the life of the writer, not the socio-political context, not the impression on, nothing else, but it is the text itself that should be given priority, said the Russian formalists like Viktor Shklovsky, Roman Jakobson, and so on. And it is exactly that which the montage theoreticians like Kuleshov and Eisenstein also upheld. And human expression, they believe, is nothing but a conflict. Any expression made by human beings, especially the artistic expression, is a conflict between conditioned and unconditioned reflexes. We proceed in life as a kind of achieving a kind of balance between conditioned and unconditioned reflexes. We are conditioned to act in a particular way, but very often what we do is a very instinctive, unconditioned reflexive action on our part. That is what makes our life what it is. I hope you remember the poem On the Move, written by Tom Gunn, in which we had talked pretty much about the same kind of thing. What did the motorbike riders do? They chose to go along the path of the unconditioned reflexes. They did not go along the conditioned way, the way that is taken, the taken way, the taken route. They went beyond that and they acted according to their unconditioned reflexes. So all of human life is this, a journey between the conditioned practices and unconditioned reflexive acts on our part. So that is why I have put the slide of the haiku once again to reiterate that impression. Let us now discuss this essay in which he seeks to create, what his intention is in this long essay. It runs into about 60 pages. His intention is to create a sense of film, what the sense of film is all about. To convey that idea, he connects it to other art forms and says that basically there is no difference between the way in which a film is made, a film impresses upon the audience. It is very much similar to the way in which a poem is composed and the way the poem affects the reader, the way in which a piece of sculpture is made and the way that sculpture affects the viewer. So the similarity between films and other art forms is what he tries to achieve, and the way in which each one uses montage in its own way. Montage is a term that you use for films. In other art forms, we don't use the word montage, but in principle, what the other art forms display is nothing but montage. So he illustrates how cinema must be the culmination, and filmmakers stand to gain a great deal, he says, by reading other literary works, by perceiving paintings, sculptures, etc., and thereby understanding how montage is used in each one of those. And the filmmaker will stand to gain much by learning from other art forms and drawing from them. So he wrote this essay basically at a time when, it was during the 1920s basically that montage was used in its peak by people like Eisenstein, Pudovkin, Vertov, and so on. And after a particular point of time, naturally, as it would happen with any film movement or any movement, there would be criticism. People were saying that there is too much, an excess of montage, and especially when it became too intellectual, including Stalin, people were quick to reject montage. And it is in that context that he says that, it's too early to reject and discard montage. He says he is actually disappointed by the way in which many filmmakers have discarded montage in such a way. I mean, their whole purpose was just to discard it, and they have forgotten even its basic aim and function. What is that? That role set itself by every work of art, the need for connected and sequential exposition of the theme, the material, the plot, the action, the movement within the film sequence and within the film drama as a whole. So montage, as we have understood by now, is putting together, assembling film pieces together. In the way they combine to create a new concept, a new quality that comes out of that juxtaposition. But what Eisenstein wants to prove through this long essay is the fact that it is not just that technique. Montage is in fact much more than splicing two bits of film together. You need to think beyond that technique. It has connections with every other work of art and in fact with life itself. So do not reject it merely as a technical gimmick that is used by filmmakers alone. And from the very beginning, he begins to quote from various literary works to convey this idea. One of the examples that he gives us is that of a story written by the writer Ambrose Bierce. There is a story called The Inconsolable Widow, in which, try to visualize it as I explained the context for you. You have the scene of a tomb, and beside it you have a woman in black crying. Okay, she is standing beside the grave and crying. What is the impression that comes in your mind? You think that she's dressed in black, therefore she's a widow, and that she would be mourning the death of her husband. Isn't that so? Adanallo nammal vicharikkunnu. That is the immediate conclusion that we arrive at. And in the story, that is what happens. There's somebody, a stranger comes by that way. He watches this lady crying and he comes and consoles her, saying, "Console yourself, madam. Heaven's mercies are infinite. There is another man somewhere besides your husband with whom you can still be happy. You can still marry someone." And then she says, "Yeah, there was, but this is his grave." And that is when we realize that the grave is actually not that of her husband, but it is that of her lover. And she is crying because her lover has died. How quickly we can jump to the conclusion that, when you see a woman in black and when she is crying beside a grave, she must be mourning the death of her husband. The whole beauty of the story lies in this fact. Through this montage, through this conflict, you are made to predict, act or react to it in a very predictable manner. But the beauty of the story lies in the fact that it's, the crux lies beyond that prediction. So that is the beauty of montage. The whole, if he does not, one cannot use the word montage there, but it is in principle the same way that these disparate or heterogeneous shots can act together and create a surprise emotion in the viewer. So that is the Ambrose Bierce story. Then he gives us the example of riddles. In many riddles, again the very beauty of riddles is the way is that they always make you think in a particular way. It is our tendency to think in a particular way, but the whole point is beyond that. He gives us an example of a riddle. നമ്മൾക്ക് വലിയ പരിചയമില്ലാത്തൊരു റിഡിലാണ്. നമ്മൾക്ക് എന്ത് പരിചയമാണ്? ഓടും കുതിര, ചാടും കുതിര, വെള്ളം കണ്ടാൽ നിൽക്കും കുതിര. We are familiar with such riddles, അല്ലേ? And മറ്റേതെന്തായിരുന്നു? കാറ്റിൽ ഒരു തുള്ളി മഞ്ചാടി. Here, this is something that we are not familiar. മഞ്ചാടി അല്ല, ഒരു തുള്ളി രക്തം. That is മഞ്ചാടി കുരു. Here, the raven flew while a dog sat on its tail. This is the riddle. അപ്പോൾ അതിൻ്റെ എന്താണ് റിഡിലിൻ്റെ ആൻസർ എന്ന് എനിക്കറിയില്ല. പക്ഷേ ഇതിൻ്റെ the whole, റിഡിലിൻ്റെ whole concept എന്താണ് ഇരിക്കുന്നത്? You think that the raven, you think of them as a kind of unity. We understand the riddle as though the dog were sitting on the tail of the raven. But these are actually two different things. Raven, കാക്ക പറക്കുന്നു, പട്ടി അതിൻ്റെ വാലിൽ തന്നെ ഇരിക്കുന്നു. Okay, so this tendency to bring together into a unity two or more independent objects of qualities is very strong, even in the case of separate words characterizing different aspects of some single phenomenon. So the whole beauty of the riddle lies in the fact that the answer is beyond that unity. And ഇതേ concept ആണ്, according to him, what you have in portmanteau words. നമ്മൾക്കറിയാലോ portmanteau words like, for example, smog, smoke and fog. അത് രണ്ടും കൂടെ ക്രിയേറ്റ് ചെയ്താൽ something that is entirely different. It has features of smoke, it has features of fog, but what you have is finally a different thing altogether. And he quotes examples from the father of portmanteau words എന്ന് നമ്മൾക്ക് വിളിക്കാവുന്ന ആരാണ്? Lewis Carroll in Alice in Wonderland, looking through the looking glass and the works. You have so many portmanteau words which are so interesting, the way the words have been put together. Even James Joyce in works like Finnegan's Wake. So these are all masters. And he quotes from വേറൊരു ഇദ്ദേഹം വായിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ഫ്രോയിഡിൻ്റെ ഒരു ബുക്കിൽ ഇൻ വിച്ച് ഹി ടോക്സ് അബൌട്ട് 3 situations. Again, look at the very innovative portmanteau words. Kleptoromania, അതായത് ഒരു റൊമേനിയൻ ആൾക്കാരെ പറ്റി പറയുന്ന രീതിയിൽ ഒരു ടർക്കിഷ് യു ഹാവ് ദിസ് കമ്മിങ് ടുഗെദർ ഓഫ് group of people from Turkey and a group of people from the Balkans, and ആ കോണ്ടെക്സ്റ്റിൽ ഒരാളെ കുറിച്ച് പറയാം ക്ലെപ്റ്റോറൊമേനിയ. ക്ലെപ്റ്റോമേനിയ എന്ന വാക്കാണ് അതിൻ്റെ കൂടെ ആ റൊമേനിയൻ ബാൽക്കൻ കൺട്രി ആയ റൊമേനിയയിൽ നിന്ന് വന്ന അവർ കള്ളന്മാരാണ് എന്ന് കൺവേ ചെയ്യാൻ ക്ലെപ്റ്റോറൊമേനിയ. ദെൻ ക്ലിയോപോൾഡ്, ലിയോപോൾഡ് എന്നൊരാൾക്ക് ക്ലിയോ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞൊരു വുമണായിട്ട് ഒരു എന്താ നമ്മളുടെ മഹേഷിൻ്റെ പ്രതികാരത്തിൽ പറയുന്ന പോലെ ഒരു ഡിങ്കോൾഫി. ഓക്കെ, സോ ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് കൺവേഡ് ത്രൂ ദ വേർഡ് Cleopold. Very clever use of that. So, similarly, alcoholidays. Holidays ആണ് അതിൻ്റെ മെയിൻ ഉദ്ദേശം കള്ളു കുടിക്കുക എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. So, alcoholidays. These are all examples. So, this practice, what he wants to say is, it is a very, very universal phenomenon. And what montage creates in films is pretty much the same as these new creations that have come out from ഇനിയും കുറേ കൂടെ എക്സാമ്പിൾസ് തരുന്നുണ്ട്. These are some of the early instances. So the juxtaposition of 2 separate shots by splicing them together resembles not so much a simple sum of one shot plus another shot as it does a creation. It is a new creation altogether. Remember നമ്മളുടെ ജെയിംസ് ജോയ്സിൻ്റെ A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. അതിൽ the 5th chapter deals with Stephen Dedalus' theory of art. അപ്പോൾ ആ ആർട്ട്, വാട്ട് ഈസ് എ വർക്ക് ഓഫ് ആർട്ട് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന സമയത്ത് he makes use of 3 concepts to highlight the features of a work of art. What does it have? It has harmony, it has integrity, and it has radiance. അതായത് in the first place it is a unique thing. It is something that is separate from everything else. You realize its uniqueness, its integritas, and then you realize how it is made up of many, many parts. അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഹാർമോണിയസ് ഹോൾ ആണിത്. ഇതെല്ലാം പെർസീവ് ചെയ്യുന്ന സമയത്താണ് you realize that it has a radiance all its own. It's in a similar manner that you have him talking about montage and the new creation that shares features of the earlier 2 slides but takes you much beyond that. The way that it can generate meanings, impressions, feelings and emotions. So this is with montage considered in this manner, both single shots and their juxtaposition fall into a correct mutual relationship. And the very nature of montage not only ceases to be divorced from the principles of realistic film deletion. ഇവിടെയാണ് important. He is taking the language of films to a new level, taking it away from realism. അതുവരെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന film making technique എന്തായിരുന്നു? Realism. A film can capture something in a very realistic manner. ഇതിനെയാണ്, it is with the arrival of these new Russian filmmakers that so much of attention is given to the language of films, and there is a whole lot of discussion on the way in which anti-realist, new avant-garde ways, modernist ways of making and conveying stories, making films and conveying stories can be created. It serves as one of the most coherent and practical resources for realistic narration of film content also. It's something that is beyond realistic film delineation. At the same time, എത്ര വേണമെങ്കിലും റിയലിസ്റ്റിക് നറേഷനും ഇതിന് നടത്താൻ പറ്റും എന്നുള്ളതാണ് അതിൻ്റെ ബ്യൂട്ടി. So the juxtaposition of these partial details in a given montage construction calls to life and forces into light that general quality in which each detail has participated and which binds together all the details into a whole. നേരത്തെ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞ integrity, harmony and radiance of James Joyce. The same thing. And in this essay, and I have chosen only parts of this essay for you to understand it. Please do try to read it. It's a very long essay, 60 pages olamunda, but a lot of it is actually quotations from various literary works to help us identify these instances of opposing ideas being placed together. And in this context, we need to realize the importance of the difference between image and representation. Image ആയിരിക്കും നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത്, but what it represents is something beyond the image. നമ്മളുടെ സ്ലീപ്പിംഗ് ലയണിൻ്റെ കാര്യത്തിൽ you have the image of the lion, but it represents ആ ലയണിന് അവിടെ ഒരു റോളുമില്ല. What it represents is the idea of revolution, a whole people, the entire population rising in rebellion, in anger against the SARS regime. അതാണ് ആ സ്ലീപ്പിംഗ് ലയണിൻ്റെ, awakened ലയണിൻ്റെ ഉദ്ദേശം. And to make us understand this better and to highlight the fact that this is everywhere, filmil മാത്രമല്ല എന്ന് പറയാൻ വേണ്ടിയാണ് he quotes an example from the famous Russian novel of Tolstoy, Anna Karenina. There is an instance where Anna Karenina tells Vronsky that she is pregnant. It is a very kind of shocking moment. And you have in that instance Vronsky looking at his watch on the Karenin's veranda. He was so agitated and so preoccupied that he saw the hands and the face of the watch without realizing the time. The novel invites our attention to the watch. പക്ഷെ വാച്ച് എന്ന ആ വേർഡിന് അവിടെ ആ സമയത്ത് അതിൻ്റെ പ്രാക്ടിക്കൽ പേർപ്പസ് അല്ല, സമയം കാണിക്കുക എന്നുള്ള പേർപ്പസ് അല്ല അവിടെ കൺവേ ചെയ്യുന്നത്. What the watch conveys there is a way in which it, time was in a very deceiving state at that point of time for Vronsky. അതിനു വേണ്ടിയാണ് a watch എന്ന കാര്യം, the word invites our attention to something beyond the practical purpose of the watch, which is something beyond time. So he looked at the hands and the face of the watch without realizing the time. So the image of time created by the watch did not arise there at all. He saw only the geometrical representation formed by the watch dial and the hands, and it creates a different impression altogether. So that is the difference between image and representation. Tolstoy, നമ്മളുടെ റഷ്യൻ ഫോർമലിസം പഠിക്കുന്ന സമയത്ത് one of the important essays is by Victor Shklovsky. His essay, Art as Technique, is considered as the manifesto of the formalist school, Russian formalist school. Adil, he talks about this, art is not something that is, it is always created. There is a great deal of effort that is put into any work of art to make it a work of art. And he goes on to talk about, the difficulty in perceiving it as this. The more difficult it is, the better is the work of art, according to him. Okay, and he quotes adine parayunnathu defamiliarization ennu parayunnathu. He says, have you studied that essay? I don't think you have. The whole purpose of art is to defamiliarize things. It may be an ordinary thing. When you look at let us say a tree, in its ordinary sense, he calls that the practical use of language. You are looking at a tree in a practical way, looking at the word or using the word tree in a practical way in the Banal, there is no poetry in it. But when the word tree is used in a poetic manner, he distinguishes between the practical use of language and the poetic use of language. A poetic use of language ആണ് പോയിട്രിയുടെ ഭംഗി കൊണ്ടുവരുന്നത്. Poetry മാത്രമല്ല, any work of art. And he calls that a defamiliarized language. We're not looking at the tree as a tree, but something beyond the tree. It is a defamiliarized meaning of the tree that is conveyed in the work of art. അതിലാണ് അതിൻ്റെ ബ്യൂട്ടി കിടക്കുന്നത്. And to prove this point, he quotes profusely from Tolstoy. Tolstoyയുടെ works like War and Peace, Stormer, എല്ലാ വർക്ക്സിലും you can find plenty of instances of defamiliarization. പല ടെക്നിക്സും അദ്ദേഹം പറയുന്നുണ്ട്. The way that Tolstoy presents it in a defamiliarized manner, thereby inviting our attention to the impression or the representation rather than the word. അത് തന്നെയാണ് ഇവിടെയും നടക്കുന്നത്. Eisenstein keeps quoting from Tolstoy to convey the idea of the difference between the image and the representation. So the formation of an image interests us because the mechanics of its formation in life turn out to be the prototype of the method of creating images in art. ലൈഫിൽ ഇത് തന്നെയാണ് നമ്മൾ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് ഈ ടെക്നിക് ഫിലിംസിൽ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നതുകൊണ്ട് it can appeal very much to us. So the representation of an hour on the dial of the clock and a perception of the image of that hour, between these there lies a long chain of linked representations of separate characteristic aspects of that hour. It is beyond the image, and there is so much that is conveyed through the representation, or it represents much more than the image. And one example kuda parayunnu, he talks about the way in which when he went to the United States, he found that the streets in New York did not have names like the streets that he was familiar with in Russia. റഷ്യയിലെ എല്ലാ സ്ട്രീറ്റിനും ഒരു പേരുണ്ടാവും, ഒരാളുടെയോ ഒരു സ്ഥലത്തിൻ്റെ എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു പേരുണ്ടാവും. ബട്ട് ഇൻ ന്യൂയോർക്ക് യു നോർമലി ഹാവ് ഫിഫ്ത്ത് അവന്യൂ എന്നുള്ള അങ്ങനത്തെ നമ്പേഴ്സാണ്. മോസ്റ്റ് ഓഫ് ദ സ്ട്രീറ്റ് നമ്പേഴ്സ് ഇൻ ന്യൂയോർക്ക് ഹാവ് നമ്പേഴ്സ്. ആൻഡ് ഹി ഫൗണ്ട് ഇറ്റ് വെരി ഡിഫിക്കൾട്ട് ടു associate it. In order to remember the street names, ഇത് എപ്പോഴും കൺഫ്യൂസിങ് ആവും, ഇത് ഏത് സ്ട്രീറ്റിനാണ് ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. സോ വാട്ട് ഹി ഡിഡ് ഇസ് he made use of his the images. He he would associate each street with some of the buildings and other images that he associated with that street in order to recall the street. What he tries to highlight there is the importance of images. More than the words, more than the numbers, images have a very big role to